Going to talk about domains and ranges of functions. That's a good graphic of it. Okay. The domain is any number that can go into the function. So anything that can go into a function, that's your x value, is called your domain. And anything that comes out of the function is the result of a function is what we call y. But now we're going to call it the function of x. It means the same thing as y. So let's do an example. Here's a function. Function of x equals 3x minus 1. What that means is that any x that we stick in there, what are we going to do to it? We're going to do what the function tells us to do. We're going to multiply by 3, subtract 1 from that, and that output is going to be our f of x. So let's go ahead and graph this real quick. So if I pick x at 0, the function tells me to multiply 0 by 3 minus 1, so it's negative 1. So 0, negative 1. Bam, that point's on there. If I pick x for 1, the function tells me 3 times 1 is 3 minus 1 is 2, so there's that point. And let's pick a negative 1. So when I plug in negative 1, that's negative 3 minus 1 is negative 4. Boom. I always do 3 points to make a straight line. It only takes 2, but I always do 1 extra just in case I make a boo-boo on the math. And then we would put a straight line on there. This line goes on for infinity both ways. So the domain is x can be any number in the reals, and the range is the function of x can be any number in the reals as long as x is a real number. Okay, it was pretty basic. Here is an uglier example. The function of x equals 4 divided by x minus 5. Right off the bat, you should be noticing that the denominator is going to give you trouble, x minus 5. Right off, immediately, you should know that the domain, x can be any number except for 5. Why can't it be 5? Because if we put 5 minus 5, that makes 0, and we can't have 0 as a denominator because we haven't figured out how to divide by 0 yet. I'm still working on it. But the range, it's going to be affected by the domain. In other words, the function of x will never be 0. In other words, there's no number for x you could pick here that would make this function of x equal 0. Let's go ahead and plot a few numbers. Always pick 0, right? Plug in 0 for x. 0 minus 5 is negative 5, so 4 divided by negative 5 is negative 4/5. Boom, there's that point. Let's pick a couple more. When I plug in 1, I get negative 1. When I plug in 2, I get 2 minus 5 is negative 3. 4 divided by negative 3 is negative 4/3. Boom. So let's just plug in a couple more. You see what's happening is the closer we get to 5, the more negative value we get here. I always pick a number right next to whatever the limit is. So 4.9. 4.9 minus 5 is negative 0.1. 4 divided by negative 0.1 is negative 40. So this point is so way down here, so far off the graph you can't see it. And it's lining right up to the x equals 5 line, but it will never touch that, okay? There'll never be a point on this line, x equals 5, and that's what we call an asymptote. It approaches it, but it never touches it. It's also used in calculus, but just remember that's an asymptote. Pronounced funny, spelled funny. Now let's pick a couple of negative numbers just to make sure to see where it's going. So if I plug in a negative 1, I get negative 4/6, also known as negative 2/3. I'm going to go way out here. Negative 5, right? Negative 5 minus 5 is negative 10. 4 over negative 10 is negative 4 over 10, 2/5. So the farther you go out this way, the closer it approaches the x-axis, but again, it's never going to touch it. That's another asymptote. And then if we start using values greater than 5, we get points that are a reflection. It is symmetrical across the axis where these two meet. This is what we call a hyperbola. Okay, and let me go over one last one here. We could write it like that. The domain is the union between these two sets. And the union between these two sets, we could just write it like that, I guess. Here's another quickie example. What happens with, we cannot take the square root of a negative number yet, so the domain has to be less than 4. Okay, so that's going to throw off the range as well. And I hope that's it. Hope you liked it. MGZ out.